Reading Dracula. How these papers have been placed in sequence will be made manifest in the reading of them. All needless matters have been eliminated, so that a history almost at variance with the possibilities of latter-day belief may stand forth as simple fact. There is, throughout, no statement of past things wherein memory may err, for all the records chosen are exactly contemporary, given from the standpoints and within the range of knowledge of those who made them. Chapter 1. Jonathon Harker's Journal. 3rd of May. Bistritz. Left Munich at 8:35 p.m. on the 1st May, arriving at Vienna early next morning. Should have arrived at 6:46, but train was an hour late. Budapest seems a wonderful place, from the glimpse which I got of it from the train, and the little I could walk through the streets. I feared to go very far from the station. We had arrived late and would start as near as correct time as possible. The impression I had was that we were leaving the west and entering the east, the most western of splendid bridges over the Danube, which is here of noble width and depth, took us amongst the traditions of Turkish rule. We left in pretty good time, and came after nightfall in Klausenberg. Here I stopped for the night at the Hotel Royal. I had for dinner, or rather supper, a chicken done up some way with red pepper, which was very good, but thirsty. Random. Good recipe for Mina. I asked the waiter, and he said it was called paprika bendel, and that it was a national dish. I should be able to get it anywhere along the Carpathians. I found my smattering of German very useful here. Indeed, I don't know how I should be able to get on without it. Having some time at my disposal when in London, I visited the British Museum, and made search among the books and maps of the library regarding Transylvania. It had struck me that some foreknowledge of the country could hardly fail to have some importance in the dealing with the noble of that country. I find that the district he named is in the extreme east of the country, just on the borders of 3 states, Transylvania, Moldavia, and Bukovina, in the midst of the Carpathian Mountains, one of the wildest and least known portions of Europe. I was not able to light on any map or work giving the exact locality of Castle Dracula, as there are no maps of this country as yet to compare with our own Ordnance Survey's maps. But I found the Bistritz, the post town named by Count Dracula, is a fairly well-known place. I shall enter here some of my notes, as they may refresh my memory when I talk over my travels with Mina. The population of Transylvania, there are 4 distinct nationalities: Saxons in the south, and mixed with them are the Wallachs, who are the descendants of the Dacians, Magyars in the west, and Szeklerys in the east and north. I am going among the latter, whom claim to be descended from Attila and the Huns. They may be so, for when the Magyars conquered the country in the 11th century, they found the Huns settled in. I read that every known superstition in the world is gathered into a horseshoe of the Carpathians, as if it were the center of some sort of imaginative whirlpool. If so, my stay may be very interesting. I must ask the Count all about them. I did not sleep well, though my bed was comfortable enough, for I had all sorts of queer dreams. There was a dog howling all night under my window, which may have been something to do with it, or it may have been the paprika, for I had to drink up all the water in my carafe, and was still thirsty. Towards morning I slept, and was awakened by the continuous knocking at my door, so I guess I must have been sleeping soundly then. I had for breakfast more paprika and a sort of porridge maize flour, which they called mamalinga, and an eggplant stuffed with forcemeat, a very excellent dish, which they called impletata. Memory. Remind them ask for this recipe also. I had to hurry breakfast, for the train started a little before 8, or rather it ought to have done so. For after rushing to the station at 7:30, I had to sit in the carriage for more than an hour before we began to move. It seems to me that the further east you go, the more unpunctual are the trains. What ought they to be in China? All day long we seemed to dawdle through the country, which was full of beauty of every kind. Sometimes we saw little towns or castles on top of steep hills, such as we see in the old missals. Sometimes we ran by rivers and streams which seemed from the wide stony margin on each side of them to be the subject of great floods. It takes a lot of water and running strong to sweep the outside edge of a river clear. At every station there were groups of people, sometimes crowds, and in all sorts of attire. Some of them were just like the peasants at home, or those I saw coming through France and Germany, with short jackets and round hats and home-made trousers. But others were very picturesque. The women looked pretty, except when they got near them, and they seemed to be very clumsy about the waist. They had a full white sleeves of some kind or other, and most of them had big belts with lots of strips of something fluttering from them like the dresses of a ballet, but of some coarse petticoats under them. The strangest figures we saw were the Slovaks, who were more barbarous than the rest, and their big cowboy hats, great baggy dirty white trousers, white linen shirts, and enormous heavy leather belts, nearly a foot wide, all studded over with brass nails. They wore high boots, with their trousers tucked into them, and had long black hair and heavy black mustaches. They are all very picturesque, but do not look prepossessing. On the stage they would have been set down on the same old Oriental band of brigands. They are, however, I am told, very harmless and rather wanting in natural self-assertion. It was on the dark side of twilight when we got to Bistritz, which is a very interesting old place. Being practically on the frontier, for the Borgo Pass leads from it into Bukovina, it has a very stormy existence, and it certainly shows marks of it. 50 years ago, a series of great fires took place, which made terrible havoc of 5 separate occasions. At the very beginning of the 17th century, it underwent a siege of 3 weeks and lost 13,000 people, the casualties of war proper being assisted by famine and disease. Count Dracula had directed me to go to the Golden Crone Hotel, which I found, to my great delight, to be thoroughly old-fashioned, for of course I wanted to see all I could in the ways of the country. I was evidently expected, for when I got near the door, I faced a cheery-looking elder woman in the usual peasant dress, white undergarment with long double apron, front and back, of colored stuff fitting almost too tightly for modesty. When I came close, she bowed and said, "The gentleman?" "Yes," I said, "Jonathon Harker." She smiled and gave some message to an elderly man in white-sleeved shirts, who had followed her to the door. He went and immediately returned with a letter. "My friend, welcome to the Carpathians. I am anxiously expecting you. Sleep well tonight. At 3 tomorrow, the diligence will start for Bolgavia. A place is kept for you. At Borgo Pass, my carriage will await you, and will bring you to me. I trust that your journey from London has been a happy one, and that you will enjoy your stay in my beautiful land. Your friend, Dracula." I found that my landlord had got a letter from the Count, directing him to secure the best place on the coach for me, but on making inquiries as to the details, he seemed somewhat reticent. He pretended that he could not understand my German. This could not be true, because up to then he had understood it perfectly. At least, he answered my questions exactly as if he did. He and his wife, the old lady who had received me, looked at each other in a frightened sort of way. He mumbled out that the money had been sent in a letter, and that was all he knew. When I asked him if he knew Count Dracula, and could tell me anything about his castle, he and his wife both crossed themselves, and saying that they knew nothing at all, simply refusing to speak further. It was so near the time of starting that I had no time to ask anything else, for it was all very mysterious, and not by any means very comforting. Just before I was leaving, the old lady came up to my room and said in a very hysterical way, "Must you go? Oh, young Ed, must you go?" She was in such an excited state that she seemed to have lost her grip of what German she knew, and mixed it up with some other language which I did not know at all. I was just able to follow her by asking many questions. When I told her that I must go at once, and that I was engaged to important business, she asked again, "Do you know what day it is?" I answered that when it was the 4th of May. She took her head as she said again, "Oh, yes, I know that. But do you know what day it is?" On my saying that I did not understand, she went on, "It is the eve of St. George's Day. Do you not know what tonight is when the clock strikes midnight? All the evil things in the world will have full sway. Do you know where you are going, and what you are going to?" She was in such evident distress that I tried to comfort her, but without effect. Finally, she went down on her knees and implored me not to go, at least to wait a day or two before starting. It was very ridiculous, but I did not feel comfortable. However, there was business to be done, and I could allow nothing to interfere with it. I therefore tried to raise her up and said, as gravely as I could, that I thanked her, but my duty was imperative, and that I must go. She then rose and dried her eyes, and making a crucifix from her neck, offered it to me. I did not know what to do, for, as an English churchman, I have not been taught to regard such things as measure of idolatrous, and yet it seemed so ungracious to refuse an old lady meaning so well, and in such a state of mind. She saw, I suppose, the doubt in my face, for she put the rosary around my neck, and said, "For your mother's sake," and went out of the room. I am writing up this part of the diary whilst I am waiting for the coach, which is, of course, late, and the crucifix is still around my neck. Whether it is the old lady's fear, I do not know, but I am feeling nearly as easy in my mind as usual. If this book should ever reach Mina before I do, let it bring my goodbye. Here comes the coach. May 5th. The castle. The gray of the morning has passed, and the sun is high over the distant horizon, which seems jagged. Whether with trees or hills, I do not know, for it is so far off that big things and little are mixed. I am not sleepy, and as I am not to be called until I awake, naturally I write till sleep comes. There are many odd things to put down, and lest who reads them may fancy that I dined too well before I left Bistris, let me put down my dinner exactly. I dined on what they called robber steak, bits of bacon, onion, and beef, seasoned with red pepper, and strung on sticks and roasted over the fire, in a simple style of London cat's meat. The wine was golden Midiash, which produces a queer sting on the tongue, which is, however, not disagreeable. I had only a couple of glasses of this, and nothing else. When I got on the coach, the driver had not taken his seat, and I saw him talking with the landlady. They were evidently talking of me, for every now and then they looked at me, and some of the people who were sitting on the bench outside the door, which they call by a name meaning word-bearer, came and listened, and then looked at me, most of them pityingly. I could hear a lot of words often repeated, queer words, for these are many nationalities in the crowd. So I quietly got my polyglot dictionary from my bag and looked them up. I must say they were not cheering to me. Amongst them were Oleg, or Ordeg, meaning Satan, Hokol, meaning hell, Sergoisha, witch, Vorlok, and Vorslak, both of which mean the same thing, one being Slovak and the other being Serbian for something that is either werewolf or vampire. Memo. I must ask Count about these superstitions. When we started, the crowd round the inn door, which had this time swelled to a considerable size, all made the sign of the cross and pointed two fingers towards me. With some difficulty, I got a fellow passenger to tell me what they meant. He would not answer at first, but on learning that I was English, he explained to me that it was a charm or guard against the evil eye. This was not very pleasant for me, just starting for an unknown place to meet an unknown man, but everyone seemed to be kind-hearted and so sorrowful and so sympathetic that I could not but be touched. I shall never forget the last glimpse which I had of the inn-yard and the crowd of the picturesque figures, all crossing themselves, as they stood around a wide archway with its background of rich foliage of oleander and orange trees and green tubs clustered in the center of the yard. Then our driver, whose wide linen drawers covered the whole front of the back seat, Gotza, they called them, cracked his big whip over the four small horses which ran abreast, and we set off on our journey. I soon lost sight and recollection of ghostly fears and the beauty of the scene as we drove along, although I had known the language, or rather languages, which my fellow passengers were speaking. I might not have been able to throw them off so easily. Before us lay green sloping land full of forests and woods, and here and there steep hills, crowned with clumps of trees or with farmhouses, the lank gable end of the road. There was everywhere a bewildering mass of fruit blossoms, apple, plum, pear, and cherry. As we drove by, I could see the green grass under the trees spangled with the fallen petals. In and out amongst these green hills of what they called the Mittelland ran the road, losing itself as it swept through the grassy curve, or was shut out by the strangling ends of the pine woods, which here and there ran down the hillsides like tongues of flame. The road was rugged, but we still seemed to fly over it with a feverish haste. I could not understand then what the haste meant, but the driver was evidently bent on losing no time in reaching Borgo Prund. I was told that this road in the summer time excellent, but that it had not yet been put in order after the winter snows. In this respect, it is different from the general run roads of the Carpathians, for it is an old tradition that they are not to be kept in too good order. For old Hospers would not repair them, lest the Turk should think that they were preparing to bring in foreign troops, and so hasten the war, which was already always really a loading point. Beyond the green swelling hills of Middleland rose mighty slopes of forests up to the lofty steeps of the Carpathians themselves. Right and left of us they towered, with the afternoon sun falling full upon them and bringing out the glorious colors of this beautiful range. Deep blue and purple in the shadows of the peaks, green and brown where the grass and rock mingled, an endless perspective of jagged rock and pointed crags, till these were themselves lost in the distance, where the snowy peaks rose grandly. Here and there seemed mighty rifts in the mountains, through which, as the sun began to sink, we saw now again the white gleam of falling water. One of my companions touched my arm as we swept around the base of the hill and opened up the lofty snow-covered peak of the mountain, which seemed, as we wound on our serpentine way, to be right before us. "Look, Etenzik, God's seat!" And he crossed himself reverently as we wound our endless way and the sun sank lower and lower behind us. The shadows of evening began to creep around us. This was emphasized by the fact that the snowy mountain top still held the sunset. It seemed to glow out with a delicate, cool pink. Here and there we passed Eziks and Sloviks, all in picturesque attire, but I noticed that glitter was painfully prevalent. By the roadside were many crosses, and as we swept by, my companions all crossed themselves. Here and there was a peasant man or woman kneeling by the shrine, who did not even turn around as we approached. It seems in the self-surrender of devotion to have neither eyes nor ears for the outer world. There were many things new to me. For instance, hayricks in the trees here and there were beautiful masses of weeping birch, their white stems shining like silver through the delicate green of the leaves. Now and again we passed a little wagon, an ordinary peasant's cart, with its long snake-like vertebrae, calculated to suit the inequalities of the road. On this were sure to be seated quite a group of homecoming peasants, the Sezaks, all in their white, and the Slovaks with their colored sheepskins, the latter carrying lance fashion along their sleeves, with the axe at the end. As the evening fell, it began to get very cold, and the growing twilight seemed to merge into one dark mistiness. The gloom of the trees, oak, beech, and pine, though the valleys which ran deep between the spurs of the hills. As we ascended through a pass, the dark firs stood out here and there against the background of the late-lying snow. Sometimes, as the road was cut through the pine woods, there seemed the darkness to be closing down upon us. Great masses of grayness, which here and there bestrewed the trees, producing a peculiarly weird and solemn effect, which carried on the thoughts and grim fancies engendered earlier in the evening. The falling sunset threw a strange relief, the ghost-like clouds which amongst the Carpathians seemed to wind ceaselessly through the valleys. Sometimes the hill was so steep that, despite our driver's haste, the horses could only go slowly. I wished to get down and walk up them, as we do at home, but the driver would not hear it. "No, no," he said, "you must not walk here. The dogs are too fierce." And then he added, with what he evidently meant for a grim pleasantry, for he looked round to catch the approving smile of the rest, "And you have much enough such manners before you go to sleep." The only stop he would make was a moment's pause to light his lamps. When it grew dark, there seemed to be some excitement amongst the passengers, and they kept speaking to him, one after the other, as though urging him to further speed. He lashed the horses unmercifully with his long whip, and the wild cries of encouragement urged them on the further excursions. Then, through the darkness, I could see a sort of patch of grey light ahead of us, as though there were a cleft in the hills. The excitement of the passengers grew greater. The crazy coach rocked on its great leather springs, and swayed like a boat tossed on a stormy sea. I had to hold on. The road grew more level as we appeared to fly along. The mountains seemed to come nearer to us on each side, and to frown upon us. We were entering Borgo Pass. One by one, several of the passengers offered me gifts, which they pressed upon me with earnestness, which would take no denial. These were certainly an odd and very kind, but each was given in the sample of good faith, with a kindly word and a blessing, and with that strange mixture of fear-meaning movements which I had seen outside the hotel in Bistris. The sign of the cross, and the guard against the evil eye. Then, as we flew along, the driver leaned forward, and on each side the passengers, craning over the edge of the coach, peered eagerly into the darkness. It was evident that something very exciting was either happening or expected. But though I asked each passenger, no one would give me the slightest explanation. The state of excitement kept me on for some little time, and at last we saw before us the pass opening on the eastern side. There were dark, rolling clouds overhead, and in the air the heavy, oppressive sense of thunder. It seemed as though the mountain range had separated two atmospheres, and that now we had got to the thunderous one. I was now myself looking out for the conveyance which was to take me to the Count. Each moment I expected to see a glare of lamps through the blackness, but all was dark. The only light was the flickering rays of our own lamps, in which steam from our hard-driven horses rose like white clouds. We could now see the sandy road lying white before us. There was no sign of a vehicle. The passengers drew back with a sigh of gladness, which seemed to mock my own disappointment. I was already thinking what I had best do, when the driver, looking at his watch, said to the others something I could hardly hear. It was spoken so quietly and so low in a tone, I thought it was hour less than the time. Then turned to me, he said in German, worse than my own, "There is no carriage here. The air is not expected, after all. We will now come to the Bulgaria, and return tomorrow or the next day. Better the next day." Whilst he was speaking, the horses began to neigh and snort and plunge wildly, so that the driver had to hold them up. Then, amongst a chorus of screams from the peasants, and a universal crossing of themselves, a caleche with 4 horses drove up behind us, overtook us, and drove up beside the coach. I could see from the flash of our lamps, and the rays fell on them, that the horses were coal-black and splendid animals. They were all driven by a tall man with a long brown beard and great black hat, which seemed to hide his face from us. I could only see the gleam of a pair of very bright eyes, which seemed red in the lamplight as he turned to us. He said to the driver, "You are early tonight, my friend," the man stammered in reply. "The English air was in a hurry," to which the stranger replied. "That is why, I suppose, you wished him to go to Bukovina. You cannot deceive me, my friend. I know too much, and my horses are swift." Well, as he spoke, he smiled, and the lamplight fell on a hard-looking mouth, with very red lips and sharp-looking teeth, as white as ivory. One of my companions whispered to another in the line of burghers floor, "Des Southern, reten snel," for the dead travel fast. The strange driver evidently heard the words, for he looked up with a gleaming smile. The passenger turned away, at the same time putting his 2 fingers and crossing himself. "Give me the air's luggage," said the driver, and with exceeding electricity, my bags were handed out and put in the caleche. When I descended from the side of the coach, the caleche was close alongside. The driver helped me with a hand which caught my arm in a grip of steel. His strength must have been prodigious. Without a word, he shook his reins. The horses turned, and he swept into the darkness of the pass. As I looked back, I saw the steam from the horses of the coach by the light of the lamps, and projected themselves on the figures of the late companions crossing themselves. Then the driver cracked his whip and called to the horses, and off they swept on their way to Bukovina. As they sank into the darkness, I felt a strange chill, and a lonely feeling came over me. But a cloak was thrown over my shoulders, and a rug across my knees, and the driver said in excellent German, "The night is chilled, mein Herr, and my master the Count bade me take care of you. There is a flask of Slovitz, a plum brandy of the country, under the seat, if you should require it." I did not take any, but it was a comfort to know that it was there all the same. I felt a little strangely, and not a little frightened. I think, had there been any alternative, I should have taken it, instead of prosecuting that unknown night journey. The carriage went at a hard pace straight along. Then we made a complete turn and went along another straight road. It seemed to me that we were simply going over and over the same ground again, so I took note of some salient point and found that this was so. I would have liked to have been asked the driver what this all meant, but I really feared to do so, for I thought that, placed as I was, any protest would have had no effect in the case where there had been intention to delay. By and by, however, as I was curious to know what time was passing, I struck a match. By its flame looked at my watch. It was within a few minutes of midnight. This gave me a sort of shock, for I suppose the general superstition about midnight was increased by my recent experiences. I waited with a sick feeling of suspense. Then a dog began to howl somewhere in a farmhouse far down the road, with long, agonized wailing, as if from fear. The sound was taken up by another dog, and then another, and another, till borne on the wind which now sighed softly through the pass, a wild howling began, which seemed to come from all over the country, as far as the imagination could grasp it through the gloom of the night. At the first howl the horses began to strain and rear, but the drover spoke to them soothingly, and they quieted, but shivered and sweated as though after a runaway from sudden fright. Then, far off in the distance, mountains on each side began louder and sharper howling, that of wolves, which affected both the horses and myself in the same way. For I was minded to jump from the cliff and run, whilst they reared again and plunged madly, so that the driver had to use all his great strength to keep them from bolting. In a few minutes, however, my own ears got accustomed to the sound, and the horses so far became quiet that the driver was able to descend and to stand before them. He petted them and soothed them, and whispered something in their ears, as I have heard of horse tamers doing, with the extraordinary effect, for under his caress it became quite manageable again, though they still trembled. The driver again took his seat, and shaking his reins started off at a great pace. This time, after going to the far side of the pass, he suddenly turned down a narrow roadway which ran sharply to the right. Soon we were hemmed with the trees, which in places arched right over the roadway till we passed through a tunnel. And again, great frowning rocks guarded us boldly on either side. Though we were in shelter, we could hear the rising wind, for it moaned and whistled through the rocks, and the branches of the trees crashed together as we swept along. It grew colder and colder still, and fine powdery snow began to fall, so that soon we and all around us were covered with white blankets. The keen wind still carried the howling of the dogs, though this grew fainter as we went on our way. The baying of the wolves sounded nearer and nearer, as though we were closing around us from every side. I grew dreadfully afraid, and the horses shared my fear, but the driver was not in the least disturbed. He kept turning his head left to right, but I could not see anything through the darkness. Suddenly, away on our left, I saw a faint flickering blue flame. The driver saw it at the same moment. He at once checked the horses and, jumping to the ground, disappeared into the darkness. I did not know what to do, as the howling of the wolves drew closer. But while I wondered, the driver suddenly appeared. Without a word, took his seat, and we resumed our journey. I think I must have fallen asleep, and kept dreaming of the incident, for it seemed to be repeated endlessly, and now, looking back, it is like a sort of awful nightmare. Once the flame appeared so near the road that even the darkness around us could not catch the driver's motions. He went rapidly to where the blue flame arose. It must have been very faint, for it did not seem to illumine the place anywhere around it. Gathering a few stones, formed them into some device. Once there appeared a strange optical effect when he stood between me and the flame, but did not obstruct it, for I could see its ghostly flicker all the same. This startled me, but as the effect was only momentary, I took it that my eyes deceived me in straining through the darkness. Then, for a time, there were no blue flames, and we sped onwards into the gloom, with the howling of the wolves around us, as though they were following in a moving circle. At last there came a time when the driver went further afield than he had yet gone, and during his absence the horses began to tremble worse than ever, and to snort and scream with fright. I could not see any cause for it, for the howling of the wolves had ceased altogether. But just then the moon, sailing through the black clouds, appeared behind the jagged crest of the beetling pine-clad rock, and by its light I saw around us a ring of wolves, with white teeth and lolling red tongues, with long sinewy limbs and shaggy hair. They were 100 times more terrible in the grim silence which held them than ever when they howled. For myself, I felt a sort of paralysis of fear. It is only when a man feels himself face to face with such horrors that he can understand their true import. All at once the wolves began to howl as though the moonlight had some peculiar effect on them. The horses jumped about and reared and looked helpless around with eyes that rolled in painful way to see. But the living ring of terror encompassed them on every side, and they had perforce to remain within it. I called to the coachman to come, for it seemed to me that our only chance was to try to break out through the ring, and to aid his approach. I shouted and beat the side of the calichi, hoping that the noise would scare the wolves to the side, so that to give him a chance of reaching the trap. How he came there I know not, but I heard his voice raised in a tone of imperious command, and looking towards the sound, saw him stand in the roadway, as he swept his long arms through the brushing aside of the impalpable obstacle. The wolves fell back, and back further still. Just then a heavy cloud passed across the face of the moon, and there we were in the darkness once more. When I could see again, the driver was climbing on the calichi, and the wolves had disappeared. This was so strange and uncanny that a dreadful fear came upon me, and I was afraid to speak or move. The time seemed interminable as we swept on our way, now in almost complete darkness, for the rolling clouds obscured the moon. We kept on ascending, with occasional periods of quick descents, but the man always ascending. Suddenly I became conscious of the fact that the driver was in the act of pulling up the horses in the courtyard of a vast ruined castle, from whose tall black windows came no ray of light, and whose broken battlements showed jagged lines against the moonlit sky, lighted and warmed with another log fire, which sent a hollow roar up a wide chimney. The Count himself left my luggage inside, and withdrew, saying, before he closed the door, "You will need, after your journey, to refresh yourself by making your toilet. I trust you will find all you wish. When you are ready, come into my other room, where you will find your supper prepared." The light and warmth of the Count's courteous welcome seemed to have dissipated all my doubts and fears. Having then reached my normal state, I discovered that I was half famished with hunger, so, making a hasty toilet, I went into the other room. I found supper already laid out. My host, who stood on one side of the great fireplace, leaning against some stonework, made a graceful wave of his hand to the table and said, "I pray you, be seated, and sup how you please. You will, I trust, excuse me that I do not join you, but I have already dined, and I do not sup." I handed to him the sealed letter which Mr. Hawkins had entrusted me. He opened it and read it gravely. Then, with a charming smile, he handed it to me read. One passage of it, at least, gave me a thrill of pleasure. "I much regret that I have an attack of gout from which my lady and I constantly suffer, forbids absolutely any travelling on my part for any time to come. But I am happy to say I can send sufficient substitute, one in whom I have every possible confidence. He is a young man, full of energy and talent in his own way, and of a very faithful disposition. He is discreet and silent, and has grown into manhood in my service. He shall be ready to attend you when you will during his stay, and shall take your instructions in all matters." The Count himself came forward and took off the cover of a dish, and I fell to at once on an excellent roast chicken, with some cheese and salad and a bottle of old Tokay, of which I had 2 glasses, was my supper. During the time I was eating it, the Count asked me many questions as to my journey, and I told him by degrees all I had experienced. By this time I had finished my supper, and by the host's desire, had drawn up a chair by the fire and began to smoke a cigar which he had offered me, at the same time excusing himself that he did not smoke. I had now the opportunity of observing him, found him of a very marked physiognomy. His face was strong, a very strong, aquiline, and very high-bridged, thin nose, with peculiarly arched nostrils, with a lofty, domed forehead, and hair growing scantily around the temples, but profusely elsewhere. His eyebrows were very massive, almost meeting over the nose, and with bushy hair that seemed to curl in its own profusion. The mouth, so far as I could see it under the heavy mustache, was fixed and rather cruel-looking, with the particularly sharp, white teeth. These protruded over his lips, whose remarkable readiness showed astonishing vitality in a man of his years. For the rest, his ears were pale, and at the tops extremely pointed. The chin was broad and strong, and the cheeks firm, though thin. The general effect was one of extraordinary pallor. Hitherto I had noticed the backs of his hands as they lay on his knees in the firelight, and they seemed rather white and fine, but seeing them close to me, I could not but notice that they were rather coarse, broad, with squat fingers. Strange to say, there were hairs in the center of his palms. The nails were long and fine, and cut to a sharp point. The Count leaned over me. His hand touched me. I could not repress a shudder. It may have been that his breath was rank, but a horrible feeling of nausea came to me, which, do what I would, I could not conceal. The Count, evidently noticing it, drew back, and with a grim sort of smile, which showed me more than he had done yet the protuberant teeth. He sat down again, and on his own side of the fireplace. We were both silent for a while. As I looked towards the window, I saw the first dim streak of the coming dawn. There seemed to be a strange stillness over everything, but as I listened and I heard, down below the valley, the howling of many wolves. The Count's eyes gleamed as he said, "Listen to them, the children of the night, what music they make." Seeing, I suppose, some expression on my face strange to him, he added, "Ah, sir, you dwellers in the city cannot enter into the feelings of the hunter." Then he rose and said, But you must be tired. Your bedroom is all ready, and tomorrow you shall sleep as late as you will. I have to be away till afternoon, so sleep well and dream well." And with a courteous bow, he opened for me himself the door to the octagonal room, and I entered my bedroom. I am all in a sea of wonders. I doubt, I fear, I think strange things which I dare not confess to my own soul. God help me, if only for the sake of those dear to me. 7th May. It is again early morning, but I have rested and enjoyed the last 24 hours. I slept late in the day and awoke of my own accord. When I had dressed myself and went to my room where we had supped, I found a cold breakfast laid out, with coffee kept hot by the pots being placed beneath the hearth. There was a card on the table, on which was written, "I have to be absent for a while. Do not wait for me. D." So I sat and enjoyed a hearty meal. When I was done, I looked for a bell so that I might let the servants know that I had finished, but I could not find one. There are certainly odd deficiencies in the house, considering the extraordinary evidences of wealth which are all around me. The table service was gold, and so beautifully wrought that it must have been of immense value. The curtains and upholstery of the chairs and sofas and the hangings about my bed were of the costliest and most beautiful fabrics, and must have been fabulous value when they were made, for they are centuries old, though in excellent order. I saw something like them in Hampton Court, but they were worn and frayed and moth-eaten. But but still, in none of the rooms there is a mirror. There's not even a toilet glass on my table, and I had to get the little shaving glass from my bag before I could either shave or brush my hair. I have not yet seen servants anywhere, or heard the sound near the castle except the howling of wolves. When I had finished my meal, I do not know whether to call it breakfast or dinner. It was between 5 and 6 o'clock when I had it. I looked about for something to read, for I did not like to go about the castle until I had asked the Count's permission. There was absolutely nothing in the room, book, newspaper, or even writing materials. So I opened another door in the room and found a sort of library. The door opposite mine I tried, but found it locked. In the library I found, to my great delight, a vast number of English books, whole shelves of them, and bound volumes of magazines and newspapers. A table in the center was littered with English magazines and newspapers, though none of them were of very recent date. The books were the most varied kind: history, geography, politics, political economy, botany, geology, law, all relating to England and English life and the customs and manners. There were even such books as references to the London Directory, the Red and Blue books, Whitaker's Almanac, the Army and Navy lists, and it somehow gladdened my heart to see me, the law list. Whilst I was looking at the books, the door opened, and the Count entered. He saluted me in a hearty way, and hoped that I had had a good night's rest, then went on. "I'm glad you found your way in here, for I'm sure there's much that will interest you. My friends," he laid his hand on some books, "have been good friends to me for some years past, ever since I had the idea of going to London, have given me many, many hours of pleasure. Through them I have come to know your great England, and to know her is to love her. I long to go through the crowded streets of your mighty London, and be in the midst of the whirl and rush of humanity, to share in life, its change, its death, and all that makes it what it is. But alas, as yet I only know your tongue through books. To you, my friend, I look to know it to speak." "But, Count," I said, "you know and speak English thoroughly." He bowed gravely. "I thank you, my friend, for your all too flattering estimate, but yet I fear that I am but a little way on the road I would travel. True, I know the grammar and the words, but yet I know not how to speak them." "Indeed," I said, "you speak excellently." "Not so," he answered. "Well I know that, did I move and speak to your London, none there who would know me for a stranger. And that is not enough for me. Here I am noble, I am boyar. The common people know me, and I am master. But a stranger in a strange land, he is no one. Men know him not. And to know not is to care for not. I am content if I am like the rest, so that no man stops if he sees me, or pauses in his speaking if he hears my words, to say, 'Aha, a stranger!' I have been so long master that I would be master still, or at least that none others should be master of me. You come to me not alone as agent of my friend Peter Hawkins of Exeter, to tell me all about my new estate in London. You shall, I trust, rest here with me a while, so that our talking I may learn the English intonation, and I would that you tell me when I make an error, even the smallest, in my speaking. I am sorry that I had to be away so long today, but you will, I know, forgive one who has so many important affairs in hand." Of course, I said I could all I could without being willing, and asked if I might come to the room when I close. He answered, "Yes, certainly," and added, You may go anywhere you wish in the castle, except where the doors are locked, where of course you will not wish to go. There is a reason all things are as they are, and did you see with my eyes and know with my knowledge, you would perhaps be understanding. I said I was sure of this, and then he went on. We are in Transylvania, and Transylvania is not England. Our ways are not your ways, and there shall be to you many strange things. There, from what you have told me of your experiences already, you know something of the strange things here may be. This led to much conversation, as it was evident that he wanted to talk, if only for talking's sake. I asked him many questions regarding things that had already happened to me on my way within my notice. Sometimes he sheered off the subject, or sometimes turned the conversation by pretending not to understand. But generally he answered all. I asked most frankly. Then, as time went on, and I had gotten somewhat bolder, I asked him of the strange things of the preceding night, for as instance, why the coachman went to the places where we had seen the blue flames. Was it indeed true that they showed where gold was hidden? Then he explained to me that it was commonly believed that on a certain night of the year, last night, in fact, when all evil spirits are supposed to have unchecked sway, blue flame is seen over any place where treasure has been concealed. That treasure has been hidden, he went on, in the region through which they came last night. There can be of little doubt, for it is a ground fought over for centuries by the Wallachian, the Saxon, and the Turk. Why, there is hardly a foot of soil in this region that has not been enriched by the blood of men, patriots or invaders. In old days, there were stirring times when the Austrian and the Hungarian came up in hordes, and the patriots went out to meet them, men and women. The aged and the children, too, on waiting for their coming on the rocks before the passes, that they might sweep destruction over them with their artificial avalanches. When the invader was triumphant, he found but little, for whatever there had been sheltered in friendly soil. But how, said I, can it have been remained so long undiscovered? When there is a sure index of it, men will take but the trouble to look. The Count smiled, and his lips ran back over his gums. The long, sharp canine teeth showed out strangely. He answered, Because your peasant is at heart a coward and a fool. Those flames only appear on one night, and on that night no man of this land will, if he can help it, stir without his doors. And, dear sir, even if he did, he would not know what to do. Why, even the peasants that you tell me of who marked the place of the flame could not know where to look in daylight even for his own rock. You would not, I dare be sworn, be able to find these places again. You are right, I said. I know no more than the dead were even to look for them. Then we drifted into other matters. Come, he said at last, tell me of London, and of the house which you have procured for me. With an apology for my remissness, I went into my own room to get the papers from my bag. Whilst I was placing them in order, I heard the rattling of china and silver in the next room. As I had passed through, I noticed the table had been cleared and the lamp lit, for it was this time deep into the dark. The lamps were also lit in the study and library, where I found the Count lying on the sofa, reading, in all things of the world, an English Bradshaw's Guide. When I came in, he cleared the books and papers from the table, and with him I went into the plans and deeds and figures of all sorts. He was interested in everything. He asked me a myriad of questions of the place and its surroundings. He clearly had studied beforehand all he could get on the subject of the neighborhood, for he evidently at the end knew very much more than I did. When I remarked this, he answered, Well, but, my friend, is it not needful that I should? When I go there, I shall be all alone, and my friend Jonathon Harker, nay, pardon me, I fall into a country's habit of putting your patronymic first. My friend Jonathon Harker, will not be by my side to correct me and aid me. He will be in Exeter, miles away, probably working the papers of the law with my other friend, Peter Hawkins. So, I went thoroughly into the business of the purchase of the estate of Purfleet. When I had told him the facts and got his signature to the necessary papers, and had written a letter with them ready to post to Mr. Hawkins, he began to ask me how I had come across such a suitable place. I read him all the notes which I had made at the time, and which I inscribed here. At Purfleet, on a byroad, I came across such a place as seemed to be required, and where was displayed a dilapidated notice that the place was for sale. It was surrounded by a high wall of ancient structure, built by heavy stones. It has not been repaired for a large number of years. The closed gates were heavy, old oak and iron, all eaten with rust. The estate is called Carfax, no doubt a corruption of the old Quarterface, as the house is four-sided, agreeing with the cardinal points of the compass. It contains all in some 20 acres, quite surrounded by the solid stone wall mentioned above. There are many trees on it, which make it places gloomy, and there is a deep, dark-looking pond, or small lake, evidently fed by some springs, as the water is clear and flows away in several far-sized streams. The house is very large, and of all periods, back, I should say, to medieval times. For one part of it is stone immensely thick, with only a few windows high up and heavily barred with iron. It looks like part of a keep, and is close to an old chapel or church. I could not enter it, as I had not the key to the door leading from it to the house, but I have taken with my kodak views from its various points. The house has been added to, but in a straggling way, and I can only guess the amount of ground it covers, which must have been very great. There are but few homes close at hand, one being a very large house only recently added to, and formed a private lunatic asylum. It is not, however, visible from the grounds. When I had finished, he said, I am glad that it is old and big. I myself am an old family, and to live in a new house would kill me. A house cannot be made habitable in a day, and after all, how few days go to make up a century. I rejoice also that there is an old chapel of old times. We Transylvanian nobles love not to think that our bones may be amongst the common dead. I seek not gaiety nor mirth, not the bright voluptuousness of much sunshine and sparkling waters which please the young and gay. I am no longer young, and my heart, through many weary years of mourning over the dead, is not attuned to mirth. Moreover, the walls of my castle are broken, the shadows are many, and the wind breathes cold through the broken battlements and casements. I love the shade and the shadow, and would be alone with my thoughts when I may. Somehow his words and his look did not seem to accord, or else it was that he cast a face that made his smile look malignant and saturnine. Presently, with the excuse, he left me, asking me to put all the papers together. He was some little time away, and he began to look at some books around me. One was an atlas, which I found opened naturally at England, as if a map was much used. On looking at it, I found certain places with little ring markings, and on examining these, I noticed one was near London, on the east side, manifestly where his new estate was situated. The other two were Exeter and Whitby, on the Yorkshire coast. It was better part of an hour when the Count returned. "Aha!" he said. "Still at your books. Good. You must not work always. Come, I am informed that your supper is ready." He took my arm, and we went into the next room, where I found an excellent supper ready on the table. The Count again excused himself, as he had dined out on being away from home. He sat as on the previous night, and chatted while I ate. After supper, I smoked, as on the last evening, and the Count stayed with me, chatting and asking questions on every conceivable subject, hour after hour. I felt it was getting very late indeed, but I did not say anything, for I felt under obligation to meet my host's wishes in every way. I was not sleepy, as the long sleep yesterday had fortified me, but I could not help experiencing the chill which comes over one at the coming of the dawn, which is like, in its way, the turn of the tide. They say that people who are near death die generally at the change of the dawn or at the turn of the tide. Anyone who has, when tired, as tied as it is or to a post, experiences change in the atmosphere can well believe it. All at once we heard the crow of the cock coming up with a prenated shrillness through the clear morning air. Count Dracula, jumping to his feet, said, "Why, there is morning again! How remiss I am to let you stay up so long. You must make your conservation regarded, my dear new country of England, very interesting, so that I may not forget how time flies us." And with a courtly bow, he left me. I went to my own room and drew the curtains, but there was little to notice. The window opened to the courtyard. I could see was the wet, warm green of the quickening sky. So I pulled the curtains again, and have written of this day. 8th of May. I began to fear as I wrote in this book that I was getting too diffuse, but now I am glad that I went into detail from the first, for there is something so strange about this place and all in it that I cannot but feel uneasy. I wish I were safe out of it, or that I had never come. It may be that this strange night existence is telling on me, but would that were all. If there were anyone to talk to, I could bear it. But there is no one. I have only the Count to speak with, and I fear I am myself the only living soul within the place. Let me be prosaic so far as the facts can be. It will help me to bear it, and imagination must not run riot with me. If it does, I am lost. Let me say at once how I stand, or seem to. I only slept in the few hours when I went to bed, and feeling that I could not sleep any more, got up. I had hung my shaving glass by the window, and was beginning to shave. Suddenly I felt a hand on my shoulder, and heard the Count's voice saying to me, "Good morning." I started, for it amazed me that I had not seen him, since the reflection of my glass covered the whole room behind me. In starting, I had kept myself slightly, but did not notice at the moment. Having answered the Count's salutation, I turned to the glass again to see how I had been mistaken. This time there could be no error, for the man was close to me, and I could see him over my shoulder, but there was no reflection of him in the mirror. The whole room behind me was displayed, but there was no sign of the man in it except myself. This was startling, and coming on top of so many strange things, was beginning to increase the vague feeling of uneasiness which I always have when the Count is near. But at that instant I saw that the cut had bled a little, and the blood was trickling over my chin. I laid down the razor, turning as I did so half round to look at some sticking plaster. The Count saw my face. His eyes blazed with some sort of demonic fury, and he suddenly made a grab for my throat. I drew away, and his hand touched the string of beads which held the crucifix. It made an instant change in him, for the fury passed so quickly that I could hardly believe it was ever there. "Take care," he said. "Take care how you cut yourself. It is more dangerous than you think in this country." Then seizing the shaving glass, went on. "And this is a wretched thing that has done so much mischief. It is a foul bauble of man's vanity. Away with it." And opening the heavy window with one wrench of his terrible hand, he flung out the glass, which was shattered into 1,000 pieces on the stones of the courtyard far below. And then he withdrew without a word. It is very annoying, for I do not see how I am to shave, unless my watch case or the bottom of a shaving pot, which is fortunately of metal. When I went into the dining room, breakfast was prepared. I could not find the Count anywhere, so I breakfasted alone. It is strange that as yet I have not seen the Count eat or drink. He must be a very peculiar man. After breakfast, I did a little exploring in the castle. I went out on the stairs and found a room looking towards the south. The view was magnificent, and from where I stood there was every opportunity of seeing it. The castle was on the very edge of a terrible precipice. A stone falling from the window could fall 1,000 feet without touching anything. As far as the eye can reach is a green sea of treetops, occasionally a deep rift where there is a chasm. Here and there are silver threads where the rivers wind in deep gorges through the forests. But I am not in heart to describe beauty, for when I had seen the view I explored further. Doors and doors everywhere, all locked and bolted. In no place save from the windows of the castle is there an available exit. The castle is a veritable prison, and I a prisoner.